Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Back again with another episode for you, and this episode, a little bit of a special one. We have Tony Baird, the Chief Technology Officer from Vodafone New Zealand, back in the studio. Welcome along, Tony.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Great to catch up again. Lots to talk about. And look, just for listeners who are wondering, because we had a bit of a special episode last week and this week, and we've been recording some extra shows. We will be talking about the latest tech news and gadgets as well, so stay tuned for that episode. We are starting to pack a bit more in, I guess you could say, to the New Zealand Tech Podcast, and we do have a bit of video content starting to come through in addition to our weekly shows. So little bit of a heads up about that, so do keep a watch out on our social channels across Twitter, LinkedIn. We now have a dedicated YouTube channel for the New Zealand Tech Podcast, which has just come online in the last week. Our first video is up there, which is a demonstration of Tesla's Smart Summon feature that was released about a week ago, courtesy of a software update. So yeah, a few interesting bits and pieces there. And look, a special thank you to the partners that are making New Zealand Tech Podcast possible, which includes Vodafone. Also, we have Spark and we have Vocus on that front from the telco side. So huge appreciation to them. We also have Sumo Logic, we have Samsung and HP. So if we had a crowd here, I'd say a huge round of applause for all of these brands that make the show possible. So without further ado, let's jump in. Now, Tony, a lot has been going on in the world of telco, and particularly, I guess today we want to dive into what's happening at Vodafone New Zealand. And since we last talked, you've made varying announcements, but 5G probably being up the top alongside Vodafone New Zealand having changed ownership. So, I think some interesting things to dive into.
Right, we'll start off with the ownership. Front. How's that?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious because it's from the outside anyway, it looked as though Vodafone was maybe in a little bit of a holding pattern for a while, and it seemed to be as much investment as maybe we've seen in the past into Vodafone, but with that change in ownership, it seems as though things have really stepped up a notch. So what's it like from your perspective?
From my perspective, I worked on the transaction from both sides, I guess, as it went through, and having the new owners has been absolutely refreshing, absolutely focused on growing the business, really investing in network and infrastructure, which is really where my passion and heart is. So I'm finding it really very rewarding having people that are locally based, Sydney and in New Zealand, out of Wellington predominantly, but across New Zealand, who have an infrastructure mindset, really trying to build the business, and very much supportive of what we're trying to do. And I mean, the 5G announcement was clearly part of that whole acquisition strategy to get us on the front foot in our network space.
Yeah, and look, I was curious with Vodafone New Zealand stepping out of being part of Vodafone Group, as an entity. I wondered, what disadvantages is that going to create? But what I've noticed is it seems like you're still very well connected back to Vodafone Group. It's not just that you carry the brand, but there's obviously a lot of other things that are still going on. Roaming continues on a global basis, albeit with a slight price bump that came in before the change.
I don't know what to say about pricing. Nothing is best.
I know that's not your area, Tony. So I can't beat you up for that one. I do travel a bit, so I notice it, but it. It looks as though you've got a fairly strong still connection to the group. So how does that actually work?
So when we separated from Vodafone, we became what's known as a Vodafone Partner Market, and what that means is there is a number of properties around the world that have a relationship back with Vodafone. So we get services like Vodafone TV. We get the software releases, the set-top boxes, and all of the infrastructure layer is supplied by Vodafone, and then we have partner content, predominantly Sky TV,
Right.
through the platform itself from a content level. So that would be one example. IoT, so we're still connected into the global IoT platform, which means that when we start to see a really huge uptake of global IoT platforms like autonomous cars, you're talking about Tesla earlier, cars, BMW, all of those sorts of cars are more and more having global IoT requirements built into them. So we're part of the IoT platform. Vodafone roaming, so we're still connected to Vodafone roaming services as far as all of the interconnect agreements, Vodafone carrier services, Vodafone procurement company, which supports on things like big cell site build programs and getting a good price on that, because New Zealand's probably got a couple of thousand cell towers compared to India with a couple of 100,000. So you sort of start to talk about the scale of Vodafone's procurement. So there's that aspect. And then at a technology and security level, I'm still part of the global technology team. I'm still on their WhatsApp group, I noticed, so that's great
Fantastic.
news. I can still get the
So you're
updates
still
from around the
tapped in.
world,
Yeah.
which is really good. So we see what I'd say is the best of both worlds, because we are able to pick pieces of technology that we really like to try locally and be innovative, work with other carriers, because we're not seen as being fully Vodafone, but we also get all of the benefits of Vodafone. So best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's good. And look, I imagine for their group being connected with smart, innovative Kiwis that like to do cool stuff, doesn't hurt them as well, having you a part of the group.
I would really like to see some of the things we're doing, basically innovation around some of the new technologies that are coming through. If we could push that back into Vodafone globally, that'd be really good. And I see some opportunities.
Yeah, good. Now, 5G, that seems to be the big buzz at the moment. There's a lot of talk in all sorts of directions. Can you run us through what 5G will actually look like when Vodafone launches in New Zealand in December? So how far off is that?
About 4 weeks. December's only around the corner,
Yeah,
so we're really.
When are you launching it? I can't remember if is there a specific date?
We
that
have
it gets
not
turned
announced
on?
a specific date,
Okay.
and it's not for me to do that.
Okay.
But December is soon, and we are on track. We have. I can't imagine the amount of work that my team's been doing to get this ready for live is pretty immense. We've had, we'll talk about some of the technology aspects, but some of the antenna designs have been evolving. 5G is still new. We're one of the first countries in the world to go live with 5G, and there's sort of tens of countries. For Nokia, it's one of the, I think we're 15th country in the world for Nokia. So the amount of change, the amount of effort to make sure that we have the right spectrum, we have the right software features, the right antennas, upgrading the cell towers, which we can go on a bit of the structural a bit later on, but all of that's had to be accommodated. As far as the build's concerned, we said we would have 100 cell sites live across Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Queenstown for December. We are currently sitting around 77 sites live on the network today. And also, as part of the announcement, we also said we were going to do a massive 4G infill. So that's 700 megahertz, increasing the footprint of our 4G and increasing the capacity of our 4G network. We're around 122 of those sites are now live. So the amount of build that's been going on is quite dramatic, and we're on track.
Yeah. Oh, that's impressive. Now, the announcement around 5G, it's only a few weeks ago now that it was made. It hasn't been very long. Was there a lot of work going on behind the scenes before the ownership changed to prep for that? Because it was seemed a bit of a surprise. You made the announcement and then we're going to be all switched on in December. So is that you were working behind the scenes for a long time, or?
Yes. So we put a plan together probably late last year, early this year, to be 5G ready, and it was around the right timing. Obviously, part of this was the new owners coming on board, and they bought into the roadmap of 4G infill and 5G leadership as being a key plank as far as mainly around fixed wireless access, so that we have an alternative for some of our residential and enterprise customers on 5G with higher data caps and other things on 5G. But also 5G will give us that innovation platform and allow us to move into other areas that we want to get into. So yes, we've been working on it for a while.
Yeah. Oh, it's pleasing to see it coming together. Now, in terms of the initial sort of 5G you're able to deliver, that's coming in part. Well, it's coming from spectrum that you currently own, but of course there are spectrum auctions that are still to be had. Maybe a couple of years out, or in terms of that next block of spectrum becoming available. So what does that mean? What are the pros and cons of the spectrum that you have to get started with?
Yes, so we have 58 megahertz of spectrum in our current allocation. Those licences will expire 2022, I think it's December 2022. The spectrum auctions that the government's been working on, they're currently sort of talking late next year, I think, is the current date. So without temporary licences or some other form of allocation, we're in a pretty good spot to have a 5G network on the 58 megahertz we've got. The limitation that we have of our allocation is it's what's called frequency division duplex, not TDD, time division duplex. So we have 2 blocks of 28, 56 in total. I think I said 58 before, 56 in total, 2 times 28, which means until we get certain features on the radio, we can't concatenate or carrier aggregate that spectrum.
Right.
So really TDD spectrum is what everybody wants, and we're talking between 80 to 100 megahertz of spectrum. So we don't have as much, and it's split across 2 blocks. But I can assure you it's showing great performance. Hundreds of megabits.
It's good anyway, but it will be even better once you. And is that mostly total speed the increase that you will see with that, or are there other
peak
aspects
speed,
in terms of latency that are impacted? Or
no, it's going to be around speed, speed and capacity. So the 56 megahertz we can join together to give us quite good capacity, great for FWA, fixed wireless access and other services, but peak speed, you'll start to see a better peak speed with 100 megahertz or 80 megahertz of spectrum. Or with some of the other features called carrier aggregation, where we can join the 2 blocks together, you'll also get good speed. So, it'll be mainly speed.
Yeah, okay. And the lower latencies that have been, I guess you could say, sort of hyped as far as 5G and low latency, what does that picture look like? I guess from what I've heard so far is that there are certain things that will enable that lower latency, like putting servers closer to where people sit and the like. Run us through how that will work and where this initial 5G network will land people from that lower latency. If somebody's, let's just say they're sitting at home gaming, they can't get fibre, and they're thinking 5G is going to solve all their problems from a latency perspective, or any other scenario. But how does that
so
pan out
if you go back in history, 2G was very much a voice and text network. 3G was the first sort of foray into data, but it still relied on very much legacy backhaul and core network architecture. 4G was data end-to-end, and starting to see the performance with that, and you started to put fibre connections into the base station. So we rolled out fibre to almost 90% of our cell sites today have fibre to the cell site. And the core network started to get virtualised with 4G, so network function virtualisation and other things where you start to turn off the legacy bays and bays of equipment. So as you see that level of evolution, 5G would be the next stage. You're talking about fibre to all of the cell sites. You're talking about gigabit per second backhaul. You're talking about 5G core ultimately when you move to non-standalone mode, a standalone mode from non-standalone mode, having a complete cloud.
What does that mean exactly?
So in the first release 15, which we're launching, the 4G network is the anchor network for the 5G, and you use a lot of the 4G core infrastructure for timing and for other aspects to synchronise between 4G and 5G. When we move to release 16 and beyond, you start to talk about standalone mode, which is 5G end-to-end. And when you get a 5G core, 5G access network, you start to see, obviously with all the backhaul that we've talked about, you start to see much, much lower latency. And then the other item you referred to, which is putting servers at the edge of the network, that's called mobile edge compute. And you're basically putting caching and other real-time applications right at the edge of the network. So that's where you're down to sort of 1 millisecond latency.
Right. I hear a bit about mobile edge compute. What I don't know is how would you expect that to work in practice? I mean, is there anyone at the moment that's going to be, I guess, paying Vodafone for you to have, that compute, caching, whatever it looks like, at every location around your network, or where would those locations be, or is that something you expect we'll figure it out over the next couple of years? First comes a bit of the network, and then over time those use cases start appearing.
I think you're right in both cases, actually. Firstly, there's a number. 5G is seen as almost being a business enabler technology. I've talked about fixed wireless access and the speeds for mobile broadband and handsets. That's obviously part of it. But 5G, a large number of the use cases are around enablement of enterprises and businesses. So things like mobile edge compute would be useful for, and is already being demonstrated for, manufacturing plants, where you want to quickly reconfigure the manufacturing plant. You want to have low latency, high throughput, a high degree of flexibility. You don't want to be susceptible to basically public spectrum like the industrial, scientific, medical Wi-Fi, which could be congested, could get interference. So you see mobile edge compute used in a factory scenario. Airports, stadiums, where you want to start having caching of video and interactive virtual reality for video, where you can actually see replays in real time. Those sorts of things are other areas where mobile edge compute. Airports, where you want to have bespoke information around flight arrivals, where the lounges are, those sorts of things. So I see lots of use cases coming forward for mobile edge.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how those pan out. But yeah, I've been hearing around that manufacturing side seems to be very much of interest, and I guess we've got a world where things move pretty quickly, and the idea that factories be able to be reconfigured quite easily. Yes, I guess if you reconfigure a factory, there's power things that need to be considered, but if data doesn't have to be considered too much, because there's that say private 5G type access within those locations, apparently that's of quite a bit of interest. So that's really interesting to know, and I think that there's been a little bit of a reporting recently about a electric vehicle manufacturing facility in Germany that's taken
which
that
Vodafone has showcased and sponsored. It looks pretty good.
Yeah,
and I also think this is great for New Zealand, because if you think about the fact that we can start having mobile edge compute for production, for rural applications, like putting sites for tractors and other things on farms, you start to see we get productivity improvements, and that means you can become more self-sufficient as a country, which means you're saving export dollars. So I see those sort of productivity ads great for us as well.
Yeah, yep. And the stadium situation, where 5G comes into play there, we were talking about Eden Park before we started. What does that look like? How do you cover, what can be, tens of thousands of people in a stadium? How do you cover that at the moment with 4G, 3G? How do you, how does that actually look?
So the traditional architecture that we've used for Eden Park was we've actually got 7 base stations around the stadium, and we use what's called a distributed antenna system. It's called a DAS, D-A-S acronym, and that means we basically use fibre optics and other distribution to put small antennas all around, and then they go back to the radio base station cluster that we have in one of the rooms downstairs. That gives us the sort of capacity we need, but with 5G we're starting to see things like massive input, massive output MIMO antennas, which give you directional capability, so you can actually do much more smarter, tailored applications, plus you get the capacity, speed and latency for instant replays and other interactive things. So for instance, massive MIMO antenna, we're launching with a 8x8 array. Very soon into the new year we'll have a 64x64 array, which gives you another lift in performance. And if you think about it, you put one of those antennas on a stadium, when people are coming into the stadium at the start of the game, it's looking at the street outside. During the game, it's doing the action replays, it's giving you the interactive experience for ordering your food, giving you location, where to deliver that food, or whatever it is you've ordered. And then after the game, it follows you out of the stadium. So you don't have patches of black holes, you've got capacity where you need it when you need it.
Right, so you can increase capacity in a particular area, completely dynamically.
Correct.
Yeah. That's very cool. And the capacity, 5G wise compared to 4G in terms of
about 5 times.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a very big step up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the speeds, up over a gigabit per second compared to 150, 200 megabits per second on 4G. So you're sort of seeing that 5-fold increase in a number of areas.
Right. So in the case of, say, Eden Park, I guess you split up a gigabit. There's not a huge amount per person, but I guess it comes down to how it's being utilised.
Yeah, like all shared medium, including fiber's a distribution technology that has a splitter that serves a number of homes. You have a peak hour and you've got to dimension the network around what that peak hour, wherever it might be, in the evenings for homes predominantly, because you're streaming video. For small businesses, it's during the day with emails and other things that they're doing. You've got to dimension the network around busy hour. And I've seen that busy hour go up. We were just talking about it the other day. When we launched 4G, we were around 1 gigabit per second throughput on parts of the network. We're now at 60 gigabits per second on certain parts of the network. So you've seen just in the last 3 years, the amount of capacity increase that we have to put through.
Right, and that's got to be a key part of 5G, doesn't it? Is that we're all expecting more and more from our devices, from our networks. We expect to be able to live stream, whether at a game, or to be able to watch content wherever we are. And the more people that I guess join that world of doing these things on their devices, the more you need to play with.
I think it's the volume of video that's going up, and also the higher resolution video screens. You've got 8K and beyond. They use a lot more bandwidth than traditional small screen standard definition.
Yep. So is a stadium part of what you're doing earlier on, or is that something that'll come a bit further down the track?
We've got most of the main airports sorted out. So airports are obviously important. There's huge usage of people going through airports, stadiums, CBDs. We're doing a mix of urban and suburban, and also looking at rural towns. So it's going to be initially Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch and Queenstown, but beyond that we're going to do a national rollout. And the new owners signed up to a 3-year to 4-year rollout program. So this is the start of the full rollout.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's good to hear. And how much will the spectrum auction play into that? You've got existing spectrum for whatever it is, about say 3 years. How important is that piece for you, and what challenges do you see in terms of must be existing owners of spectrum and so on? So there's a bit of transition there, I presume.
Yes, so everybody will have to vacate the spectrum. It's a bit like when the 700 megahertz auction was a few years ago. Analog TV was on, and we had to clear analog TV out to put the 4G onto the 700 megahertz. There'll be a similar process of clearance as far as some of the wireless service providers, some of the other carriers, and whoever secures the spectrum will obviously get their 100 megahertz, 80, 100 megahertz of new clean bandwidth.
Yeah, I remember at that time with the transition, there must have been a bit of spectrum that was used for things like wireless microphones and things.
600 megahertz
got used at events, and there was I think some devices that people had to, I don't know, throw in the bin or drop on eBay and sell them outside of New Zealand or something. Do you know if that's likely to happen this time around?
It's mainly the alternate technology. So there's a number of point-to-multipoint. If you remember WiMAX as a standard, there's a few, I wouldn't call it WiMAX, but WiMAX-like products out there that will need to be cleared. Yeah. There's a few point-to-point microwave links. There's a few OANM channels that people are using for network management, for broadcast communications. So they all need to be cleared.
Yeah, okay. So a few considerations.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, something that seems to get, I would say, a lot more than its fair share of attention, certainly on social media feeds and so on, people complaining that 5G is going to kill us all.
Yes, I've personally had emails about this.
Yeah. What's the what's going on? I have yet to see any content that carries any sort of credibility. I think you see these things up on social media, and and they're linking to an article. In fact, it had an old friend of mine in Wellington has just come back to New Zealand in recent times, and he shared something, and then there are varying groups of people that I come across, and some of them are quite smart and intelligent people, but I guess the way things get shared online, sometimes when somebody shares something, they haven't maybe joined up all the dots and sort of followed it through. So this piece that was shared on Facebook recently, I clicked through and it went to this bizarre website, and I thought, well, how credible is this? How much of an authority is this website? So I just did some simple things that I use to check credibility. So the title of the website, I googled that title. Does the .com come up when you do that search? I can't remember what it was, but they were so far down the stack, which means Google didn't hold them as a particularly credible source when you actually search their name and they're not at the top of the list, right? It'd be like searching for Vodafone New Zealand and your website sort of being a screen or two down. It'd be
hope not.
There would be a real problem there, right? But that was where they were, and then you click through to these articles, and to me there just didn't look to be really any credibility behind them, and where a scientist was referenced, and you looked into that person's expertise, and it was, this person is they've got a doctor in front of their name, but it's it's got nothing to do with the relevant sort of science from what I could see. Maybe they had a psychology degree or something. I'm just not seeing the dots joined up. I mean, what would it stop Vodafone? At what point would you go, this adds up, we can't do it, and where do you see reality on this?
Where do I start? As I said, I've personally had people email me their negative views in some uncertain terms actually around this.
Right.
It is,
and I heard you had a protest outside
we did,
the building
actually.
a couple of weeks ago.
Look, I'm an engineer and I work for Vodafone, so there will be people out there that will say he's an engineer and he works for Vodafone. I would expect him to say this. However, I would say I'm an engineer, and I look at the fact that it's electromagnetic waves, and light is an electromagnetic wave, and light can be used in a number of ways, as is radio waves, and 5G is a radio wave. None of those are in ionising bands. They are at a power level, which is part of the equation, that is below World Health Organisation guidelines. New Zealand is a signatory to all of that. And I'd also point out, as technology evolves, things normally get more mature, and we've launched 2G in the 80s, and as far as I'm aware, there's been no recorded incidents of cancer or anything from mobile phones or cell phones to this date.
Yeah.
And I would say 5G is more mature than 2G. So, you're seeing the maturity going on. So those are the sort of angles I come from.
Well, when I look back to Vodafone 2G, which it was called, the company was Bell South at the time, and I remember having it was a Nokia handset in my office. I signed up and tried it out, as I seem to do with anything new technology related, and there was a rating that they used to give to a handset around that time or reasonably soon after. Was it SAF or something to do with
safety? Yeah,
it was some sort of safety type rating. And those early phones, the number was a lot higher, and it sort of seemed to drop down since then. And the one thing that I can remember standing out to me was I had a computer. Its lid the case was sort of off it, and it kept crashing. Now, this was running a beta build of Windows NT 3.1, so that would place us around the early half of, or the first half of 1993, and it was being installed off a fairly tall stack of probably 3.5-inch floppy disks at the time, and what we found was the system was crashing. I don't know, roughly every half an hour or something. And Alistair, who I was working with at the time, I think we were trying to troubleshoot it. He said, "Paul, have you tried taking that newfandangled cell phone thing you've got out of the room? Because something that we don't tend to come across much these days, but you would sometimes hear a cell phone interfering with a sound system, a speaker or something, and I guess maybe I had external speakers, and you would sometimes notice that sound." And sure enough, we took the phone out of the room, and this computer stopped crashing.
Well, historically, we used to say, "Don't take your mobile phone into the data centres."
Yes,
we don't do that anymore.
Yeah,
things have moved on. It's premature, and certainly within all the global health guidelines.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we should look to the likes of the World Health Organisation for guidance on these sort of things. If they're saying that it's all okay, then I guess we've got a fairly big problem there, and it seems certainly from everything that I've come across that we're on pretty solid ground.
Yes, well, I believe so.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to other topics. The Rural Broadband Initiative, RBI, that's continuing to sort of grow with the work of the Rural Connectivity Group, which you're involved in. I think you're on the board.
Yes.
There. Can you just give us a little run through on what's happening on that front? Because I think certainly for those that are outside of the main centres, or anyone that travels outside the main centres, we're curious to know how things are growing with
sure.
broadband elsewhere.
The Rural Broadband Program Part 2, RBI2, was established to push broadband out to the far edge of rural New Zealand, productivity and all the other benefits that gives with rural New Zealand, and the things we were talking about before with 5G, 4G. It is actually a 4G program. It's a public-private partnership, so the government's contributing through the Telecommunications Development Levy, 270 odd million, and the telcos 2 Degrees, Spark and Vodafone contributing, I think it's about 75 million there or thereabouts. That's phase one, and the idea is to build around 400 cell sites, give or take, to rural New Zealand. There is actually an expansion program to take that further, and there'll be another tranche of build, all scheduled to be complete by around 2023. The idea is that we take geographic coverage, because when telcos talk about coverage, we've always talked about population coverage.
That's right. Yeah, we've always seen those percentages.
98.5% population coverage.
Yep.
This is to try to get it up into the high 90s of population coverage. And the problem is, obviously, there's a few, 100,000, say, people outside coverage areas historically. There's also areas of coverage on the highways, so mobile black spots, as they're called, on the highways, where there's health and safety, where people might have an accident or break down. It's to improve coverage there, and also tourist hotspots, so car parking and lay-bys and car park spots where people might be stopping off. So it's to cover 3 or 4 angles. The mobile black spot program will include 3G voice as well as 4G data, and the pure broadband component will be 4G. And we've got, obviously, IoT is another big chunk of this. So if IoT, broadband obviously for connectivity, but IoT for rural productivity, I see a huge benefit there for various applications we can talk about in a minute.
Right.
So we launched the program. We set up a team. Rural Connectivity Group is the company. Within that, there's a reasonably good level of staffing, and took a while to go through vendor selection, site acquisition. We've got quite a big pipeline of sites acquired. We're running slightly behind on the build program, though, so that's where some of the news would have come through recently. We're putting a plan together to get that back on track by June next year. And we already have 3G working on some of the mobile black spots. We have a number of 4G sites live. We'll be at around mid-60s live by Christmas this year. So good progress, but not where we need to be.
Yeah.
But I can assure you that there is complete confidence in the company and complete support by the shareholders, being Vodafone, Spark and 2 Degrees. The other directors on the company and I get on very, very well. We have a great relationship.
That's excellent. So, that's going to make a huge difference, isn't it, for those sort of edge scenarios where we've had troubles in the past with connectivity. Fills those things in, and I think overall for New Zealand it's really important that we have great connectivity as far and wide as possible.
Yes, so narrowband IoT, which is the next generation 4G, 5G IoT, we're thinking, because it's low power, wide area coverage, we're expecting to get to about 80% geographic coverage, which basically means some of the national parks. So if you're thinking about rural productivity, sensors on irrigators, scales for cows, milking sheds, you name it, we can automate it with this new technology coming through. So that's going to be really good for rural New Zealand.
That's great. What would you say geographically was our coverage before the start of the
geographic
Rural Broadband Initiative?
We sort of say 50 to 55% geography.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a
big step
massive increase.
Yeah, so today we have around 1,600 cell sites nationwide, so we're adding another 600 with this program. So that's a big jump.
Right. And I saw a little news come through from Pacific, with them sending up their satellite on a SpaceX flight. I think I saw an announcement last week.
Had a couple of chats to these guys.
Yeah. Is that something that you would see being a a sort of part of mainstream connectivity and the sort of thing that Vodafone would likely be offering to fill some of those gaps in the future?
Absolutely. So as you may or may not be aware, I used to run Farmside.
Of course, yes.
So Farmside was a satellite rural provider, still is actually, but the issue with geostationary satellites has always been latency. So a lot of these low Earth orbit satellites that are being launched means you have, instead of one big satellite sitting geostationary above the Earth in a stationary orbit, basically, you have them at a much lower Earth orbit, but you have a lot more of them, but your latency goes from 600 milliseconds down to a few milliseconds, certainly not 5G latency levels, but a lot better. And I see a huge application for that for things like DOC, for sensors out in Dockland, for trampers and hikers. Also, actually, when we move to emergency services networks, where the emergency services are currently on legacy analog and digital two-way radios. Those over time will move to 4G, 5G radio with something called a network slice, which is a 5G terminology. But they'll also have spots of coverage where satellite will close those gaps for emergency services. So definitely satellite's a key part of what we need in our toolkit of options.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to be primary communication for the large majority of applications, but it'll as you say, it's part of that toolkit.
Yes,
important part to play.
Ultimately, it would be good to see people move away from what is my physical connectivity to what are my speeds and feeds and what am I doing with it. So if it's IoT, it might need a different speed and feed to a high quality video. That's where we'd love to get to ultimately.
Yeah. Now, where I used to live in West Auckland, there was the particular sort of topography of that location meant, based on where the cell sites were, that certain parts of the property I didn't get very good coverage from Vodafone. Now,
is this Green Heighth?
No. This is out. This is out sort of West Auckland.
Yeah.
Sort of Oratia
okay.
area, and what I found was that there was one network that offered in New Zealand that offered a Femtocell, the Vodafone short signal product.
Yes.
And very, very, very helpful, because that basically solved that issue. And as my primary mobile has generally been Vodafone. I now carry multiple phones and use a mix of networks, but that was very convenient. Now, changes mean that the Vodafone Shore Signal product that would allow you basically put a mini cell site in your home, that product's disappearing. Is that right?
Okay, so Shore Signal is a Femtocell, as you pointed out. We launched that 2011.
Been around for a while.
Yeah, and at that time our 3G network was on 2100 megahertz radio frequency. So just about the time we launched 4G, we refarmed a lot of the 2G radio spectrum, which was on 900 megahertz.
Right.
Because we still run 2G, so we had to shrink the 2G spectrum down and push 3G into part of the 900 megahertz spectrum. When we did that, that improved the quality of coverage for the voice network.
Okay.
So that was one thing we did. I'll come back to the Femtocell in a minute. The other thing for 4G coverage is we launched on 1800 megahertz, and I think I said before we're rolling out about 400 4G cell site upgrades right now. We're at about 122 of those through the 400 program. That's on 700 megahertz to improve 4G coverage and capacity. So we are continually improving what's called macro coverage. With Femtocell, it's effectively pico coverage, as you rightly said, basically a small cell site in your home connected back to your broadband network. Because that product was launched in 2011, it's actually end of life, and we cannot actually buy the kit that goes in your home anymore. it's end of life.
Right.
So we're not turning the product off. We just can't guarantee how long we'd be able to supply you with equipment in the home. So we don't really want to have people say, well, you gave me this, it's been in for a year and now you're telling me it's obsolete. So we're saying it's end of life. We are working on a replacement. Firstly, we're looking at small cell technology. So small cell technology is in between the femtocell and a macro site. The price point of those has really come down dramatically since 2011. So for businesses, I would be saying use a small cell.
Right. What sort of number might you imagine? I mean, I know it's probably not your area to necessarily handle the pricing, but what are those things typically worth?
In the low thousands.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
for a business, it gives you really good coverage in the business and high performance. And there is actually a 4G variant of the Sure Signal product which we are looking at. And the other thing we're looking at is voice over Wi-Fi. So there's a number of options we are reviewing, from small cell right through to a Sure Signal replacement.
Right.
We're not turning off what you've got today. We're just saying that there is an end of life to it because we just can't get parts for it.
Yeah. Now the voice over Wi-Fi, it's an interesting one because 2 Degrees got a little bit of a jump there and have had that in the market for a little while. And I guess it has a couple of nice things. That type of scenario, you're able to take your calls where you've got Wi-Fi, even if there's not the cellular coverage, and also potentially that you can be roaming without paying for roaming. If you've got Wi-Fi and you're somewhere offshore, you can potentially take and make calls as though you were you're in New Zealand if you turned off your data roaming, for instance. What are the challenges with that? Or is that, it sounds like it's certainly something on your radar.
The first one is device availability. So not all devices are voice over Wi-Fi capable. So there is a gap there as far as devices. So that would be the biggest thing I would say is one of the areas that sort of we didn't roll that out as fast. We had the Sure Signal, which worked on pretty much all 3G devices, so we didn't have a problem there. So as devices become more voice over Wi-Fi capable, yes, we're looking at that as one of our alternatives. The other aspect, you said when you're roaming, but that depends whether that's been opened up for a roaming capability.
Right.
Some of the roaming applications, you want to make sure the broadband that you're getting has the right quality of service, or you will not get a good experience.
Yeah. No, fair point. Yeah. Okay, so that's something that may well come in the.
Yes.
Yep.
No, we're looking at all of those options as part of our replacement for Sure Signal.
Yep. And fill people in on VoLTE, voice over LTE, or over the 4G network, because that's something you've made available in recent months, right?
Yes, so voice over LTE is 4G native voice and 5G native voice. Basically, it's a voice over IP end-to-end internet protocol product. It requires a number of upgrades to your core, which we've put in place, which is part of the whole evolution to a 5G cloud core. The first big bit was the customer subscriber database, the CSDB. I recently turned off our home location register, which saves us electricity. So as part of that, we switched that off. We've moved to this new CSDB. That was needed. That's also needed for 5G, but it was also for VoLTE. So voice over LTE gives you a number of advantages. Firstly, you get high definition native voice end to end. You get really fast call setup times. You'll notice if you're
so your call quality is a step up on what we're used to.
Yes, we had native HD voice, which we rolled out a while ago, rather than standard definition voice, which had a higher codec sample rate. So that was rolled out, but the VoLTE product seems to be really high quality end to end. We're seeing call setup times as the other big advantage.
So it doesn't take so long when you try and start a call to actually get it set up. Yeah.
So no, we're seeing great performance. We launched it June of this year, and nationwide this month.
Okay. Yeah. And the key difference there was before you were sort of having to switch, I guess, if you were wanting to do data on your phone as well as a voice call. at the same time. What would actually happen there? What was different?
So the way it used to work was if you were on native 4G and you had an inbound phone call or wanted to make an outbound phone call, it was called circuit switch fallback. So you basically fall from the 4G network, you reselect the 3G network, you make the phone call, so you drop off the 4G network, and then you go back to the 4G network at the end of the call. So there's multiple layers, and that's what led to the call setup times and other issues that you're alluding to.
Yeah.
But you needed native voice over LTE, which we launched, and we were the first to get into the market.
Yeah, good stuff. Now, Spark have had a little bit of attention in the last few days because they've launched a fixed wireless broadband offering with a much bigger cap than what we've seen in the past, 600 gigs. Now, I'm not too sure just how many locations are going to be able to get that initially, because it's going to be, that's going to be dependent on location, and it's not just something that's available, everywhere instantly. Where's Vodafone heading on that front? Because I know you like to compete, Tony.
Competitive nature, yeah. So look, we are, as I said, rolling out 400 4G infill sites using L700 spectrum. That plus our 1800 spectrum gives us quite a big capacity on our 4G network. We're actually refarming 2100 megahertz for 4G, so we'll have 700 megahertz, 1800 megahertz, 2100 megahertz and 2600 megahertz all on 4G, and we will also be doing a 900 megahertz 4G trial in Wellington post Christmas. So we have quite a rich 4G layer, which will give us a lot of capacity for fixed wireless access. So that's a big investment that was part of this whole 5G program. I guess the icing on the cake is we will have the 5G product out there very soon, and that's where we'll be able to do some pretty special things. The higher data caps, every cell site is a shared resource, and there's so many bits you can get off that cell site. So if somebody's got a 600 gigabyte plan, you won't get too many plans like that off a single cell site. So I think you'll find it's reasonably targeted,
or your performance is going to drop down.
However, with our 5G, I feel confident, we'll be way up there.
Yeah. Okay. Oh well, that's, I think, certainly something to look forward to. Especially for those who can't get for instance, a nice ultra fast broadband, fibre connection. So
Yes.
It's nice to see options continuing to improve. Now, where's your what used to be called the FibreX product, which is your hybrid coaxial fibre network? Where's that at? Because that was, I guess it goes back to the Telstra Clear acquisition, and before that through a few different brands, Saturn and
Communications,
and so on.
Kiwi Cable, I think it started out as.
Right, and there were and back I don't know, around those days, I ended up providing, and I can't quite remember what I did, but because it was a long time ago, but there was someone also dabbling. Or looking into putting a second copper network in. I don't think they got very far. There was one block around Wairau Road on the North Shore.
I remember looking at that.
And so, but the hybrid fibre coaxial network, did get put in the ground, and a lot of digging and so on. Vodafone New Zealand, of course, now own that. What's the lifespan of that, and where does it fit?
Well, firstly, it has been rebranded, which you quite rightly pointed out, but we won't go down that avenue.
People can Google that if they're curious.
We launched what's called DOCSIS 3.1, 2016, I think it was. So the aim of that was to increase the capacity. We now have a 1 gigabit per second plan, which is important. We also at that time made it Vodafone TV, the new Vodafone TV set-top box capable. At the moment we are running a DOCSIS 3.0 legacy network and a DOCSIS 3.1 next generation network. The DOCSIS 3.0 has plain old telephony, so standard telephone lines going into telephone exchange effectively.
Right.
It has broadband, and it has the legacy Vodafone or Telstra Saturn TV set-top box.
Yep.
We are trying to migrate people across to the newer product that has, it's mainly the in-home experience, but you have to migrate the set-top box, you have to migrate the telephone, so there's a whole pile of in-home stuff to get right.
Yep.
Once that's all sorted, we would be at the moment the spectrum, because it's again radio spectrum, just like a base station.
Right.
So the radio spectrum goes from about 300 megahertz up to 700 megahertz. About half of it's used for the legacy and about half of it's used for the new. Once we've moved everybody across to the new, we can reharvest and double the speed and double the spectrum, just like a base station. So there is a lot of life left in it. Over time, 5G, fibre, other technologies, I guess, but for the time being, it's got life left in it.
Yep.
What we have also done when we did the DOCSIS 3.1 was we were the first to put GPON 2 to the edge of the network. So we have fibre to the curb and then coaxial cable into the home. So we have GPON 2 to the curb, which gives us a really good backhaul for other technologies. So we've got lots of options. We're working through them.
Yeah. Oh, it's good just to have a little update on that front. Anything else we haven't covered that we should be talking about, Tony?
Wow.
There was something else in the back of my mind before, and now I've forgotten what it was. So
just on the 5G front again, I guess. Look, it's the most exciting project for us and for the country. I think the main area is going to be the applications that sit on top. So working with some of our partners, police, BNZ, waste management, BNZ, they're all really keen to see how 5G can be used in their niche, and looking at how we can create applications not just at a network layer but at an application layer. So I think a lot of the focus is going to be on innovation and how that can be utilised, and we're keen to work with people on that.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch and just see what people come up with, but it seems that there is a real interest in 5G, and it seems that our New Zealand organisations are keen to innovate and use the latest of technology, where it solves a problem for them, and I guess we'll watch with interest to see what problems are able to be solved with this.
It's amazing when you think a few years back we were considered to be slightly behind on some of these technology. We're way ahead these days, and we want to make sure the applications take us to the next level of innovation and maybe export and other growth opportunities in high tech.
Yeah, well, that's certainly what interests me is how as a country we can solve problems that maybe others haven't solved, or because we see things differently, we think a little bit differently, we move a bit faster. If we can come up with these new ideas and hopefully export them out to the world, then that has a good flow on economically, which has a good flow on right across the well-being of New Zealand, right?
Yeah, so, that's why I returned from overseas after 12 years in the UK. It was to be part of this country and help commit to helping it be a better place. Good.
Well, all the best in that journey, Tony. Very good to catch up again, and we'll look forward to the next time.
We'll have to give you a trial when it goes live, eh?
Yes, very much looking forward to seeing it go live. There was a quick one other thing. Chorus, of course, made an announcement yesterday around rolling out 10 GPON, and that will, no doubt be of interest to some. Getting faster connectivity into their, I imagine workplace is going to be where most of the interest will be. But I know some of our listeners will be wanting 2 gigabits or 4 gigabit fibre to their homes. You did a little bit of a trial.
Yeah, we did some testing of it. So obviously the original release of the UFB product was a 2.5 gig shared amongst a number of homes, roughly 16 homes per 2.5 gig. So what they've had to do is upgrade the transport network to 10 gig from 2.5, and then share that potentially to a smaller number of homes passed or businesses passed. I see the initial applications because of that mainly been for businesses, as you pointed out. But ultimately, who knows? I mean, homes are going to want more and more capacity over the years. As you've seen with wireless, it's no different on the wired side. So it's an exciting development.
Yeah, good. Well, there is a little video I took at that session with Chorus yesterday, so that will be up on one or two of our channels, likely YouTube and so on, for those that are interested. And it is, I guess it's quite satisfying. I mean, that's from the trial, so it's not doesn't tie into the speed that they're offering. They're going to be marketing initially, which is the 2 and 4 gig,
yes,
gigabits product. Although I hear an 8 gigabits offering is probably likely to follow. So that speed test result looked pretty snappy at north of 8 gigabits per second.
Absolutely.
So I guess people will certainly, as they always do, figure out a way to smother that sort of performance.
Well, it's multiple high definition, ultra high definition, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking back to what sort of connectivity speeds were when I left high school. And I worked out that we've seen about a million times increase in that
absolutely
time,
what it is,
which completely just blows my mind, actually, because if anybody had told me that at that time and tried to explain how we would do it, I'm not sure I could have taken that in. But the fact that we've seen that, and no doubt there will be further increases.
Well, if you extrapolate it back, Paul, the best Morse code was 40 words a minute.
Right. Okay. Well, we're certainly we blow that away by a lot more than a million times. That's for sure.
That's right. And GPRS to 5G is about 1 million too.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, good stuff. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. And thank you, everybody, for listening in to the New Zealand Tech Podcast again. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, where we are fresh and new on LinkedIn. And we also have our brand new channel on YouTube. So we've moved over to a dedicated YouTube space for the New Zealand Tech Podcast. So join us there, and of course you can track myself, Paul Spain, and NZ Tech Podcast on a number of other places such as Facebook and Twitter. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye.